Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our readers and listeners of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. Thank you for the questions coming from our readers and audience at SmithWeekly, including Michael G., Sean M., Mike P., Dave V., and Cindy W. We have on Ron Thiessen, President, CEO, and Director of Northern Dynasty Minerals, a copper and gold focused developer that is in process of advancing the Tier 1 Pebble Project in southwest Alaska. Northern Dynasty is listed on the New York Stock Exchange under the symbol NAK and on the Toronto Stock Exchange under the symbol NDM. Ron, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Andrew, the pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Well, Ron, we have a lot to cover about the fascinating story of Northern Dynasty. But first, tell the audience about yourself and the long history you have in the natural resource business.
Well, yeah, that's a story in and of itself. I've been in the business since about the mid-1980s. I'm a professional accountant, Canadian CPA. But I haven't practiced that for many years. When I was in public practice, though, I had several mining companies and mining projects as clients, and I guess that was the entree into the business. And I initially got started mainly on the corporate development front, the deal-making side of the business, the financing side of the business. And my first bite at the apple was a project called Mount Milligan, that between 1986 and 1990, we took from a geological prospect to a takeover bid of some $265 million, basically from pennies to $265 million. And I guess that spoiled me. I said, this is a really nice business. 4 or 5 years, and you can make that happen. There were many intervening, obviously, events. I joined a group called Hunter Dickinson in 1994 as VP Corporate Development. And interestingly enough, one of the first jobs that they gave me, that Bob Dickinson gave me, was to go and see if I could do a deal with Cominco on a project called Pebble, which was located, like you said, in southwest Alaska. And it became a bit of a game of cat and mouse. He said, "Do you know anybody at Cominco?" "Yeah, I know the Cominco guys." So I phoned them up, and literally every year I would call the Cominco exploration team, because it was an exploration project at the time, and ask them if they were interested in talking about a divestiture of that, us buying it. And they said, "Yeah, we'd love to do that. Let's go for lunch and talk about Pebble." We would go for lunch. I would pay for lunch. I'd say, "No, can we get down to business?" No, we're not interested in selling it this year. So it just became a process of, I felt, me buying them lunch. Well, things do change, and nuclear winter came to the minerals sector in 1998. I remember copper went to about 61, 62 cents. Gold went as deep as about $250 per ounce. I think zinc was 28 cents. And Cominco finally relented in 2001, 2002, and we were able to acquire the project at that point in time, albeit at the bottom of the market, like I said, nuclear winter. And I remember a lot of people saying, copper was at 62 cents, saying, copper will never see $1 again. But it's a very cyclical business, and if one of the things I've learned is that you got to be a bit like the sage of Omaha, and that you have to be a contrarian. When everybody says something's not going to happen, you can rest assured that it will happen. And lo and behold, 2004 rolled around, and we entered the up leg, and a bull market ensued out of that nuclear winter, and we were sitting on Pebble. And that's basically the story, in some substance, how I got involved in the Pebble project. It's turned into an extremely unique project. A lot of people, I've been on it, obviously, for many years. We've owned it, controlled it since 2002. But like I said, I had an 8-year legacy on it before that. People say, "Aren't you tired of this project?" I go, "Are you kidding me?" I mean, a project like Pebble, it probably happens to 1 in 10,000 geologists, and while I'm not a geologist, my partners are geologists and engineers, and I just know their views and how they look at these things. This is a project that is, it's 1 in 10 lifetimes, not 1 in 1 lifetime, and it's going to be built. There is no question that it's a mine that will be built. It's just too important. It's too important to the state of Alaska. It's too important to the U.S. It's too important to the industry, and it's too important to the world in terms of its ability to provide copper wire, which is basically what electrons travel on, and our industrial world relies on electricity, and it has to have a massive amount of copper wire, and we're going into a period of phenomenal growth in electrical consumption. So we need a lot more copper than we produced in past.
Right, and it's been a long road, since acquisition to 2019. Here we are, 17 years in, and after your successes at Mount Milligan, Thompson Creek, and the so forth that happened there, and your taste of how quick things can move. This one certainly took some time, but it is a giant project, and you picked it up.
It's so much bigger than all the rest of those. Even you put all the rest of those mines together. Mount Milligan, Kemess, Campo Morado, Jitongman, Casino.
Right.
We had a dozen, but Pebble stands all alone.
And interesting how you guys came across it and who ended up selling it off. It's good stuff. So, Ron, moving till today, where are we today in the natural resource cycle? What do you think needs to change in this business for people to have a more positive awareness and true understanding of the necessity of the mining business on a global stage?
Well, I think, almost everything is set for a tremendous bull market in the metals. The various physical exchanges, Shanghai, London, Chicago, have their lowest physical inventory since, 2002. A lot of the financial traders, hedge funds and the likes, are out of the market. So we're not seeing, a lot of market manipulation by financial players. And we can see all this tremendous growth on the horizon from demand for higher needs for electricity. Therefore, that automatically converts into greater needs for copper wire. I mean, simply the automobiles. I mean, if you believe 50% of the prognostications about what's going to happen with the automobile, I mean, a standard car has 50 pounds of copper in it, a hybrid about 75, 80, a regular Tesla 135, but a four-wheel drive Tesla or four-wheel drive electric car has 235 pounds of copper. So just automobiles alone, and what do we sell? 60, 70 million automobiles a year. Never mind all of the other industrial applications. So all of those things I think are ripe. Plus our historical big tier one mines are coming off peak production. I mean, if you look at Escondida, the owners of Escondida invested about $7 billion in about 160, 180,000 ton a day concentrating capacity to simply stand still. Their grades have fallen, so they need to double their capacity just to produce what they were producing in past. Chuquicamata, one of the largest mines in the world, is going from open pit to underground. That transition takes 10 years, and they'll produce less. Grasberg, the same thing. So we're seeing, declining production and increasing demand. What's holding us back? Well, probably trade anxieties. I mean, everybody has been so focused on China, and China is the engine for all of this growth. China consumes 50% of all the copper produced in the world today. Yes, 50% goes in. Where there's a disconnect is at least half of what China consumes or buys, takes into the country, actually is then exported to the rest of the world. So all of your appliances, I mean, I'm going to say almost all the appliances that we consume in the West are manufactured in Asia. Many of the electronic circuits for automobiles and the like. So there's a lot of raw copper goes into China, but a lot of it comes out in the form of finished goods. China has become the manufacturing plant for the Western world. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't had inflation for the last 2 decades, is because the low wage environment and the way China, got all of that manufacturing in. Now, the downside to that is the West has lost a lot of manufacturing jobs, and so our concern is our unemployment levels, our high-paying jobs. How are we going to deal with this? And so we've had these huge trade imbalances between China and the rest of the world, and that's now coming to play. And you're seeing it most out of the U.S. and with the threat of massive trade tariffs, but the imposition of some trade tariffs. I mean, $200 billion worth of trade tariffs. I mean, to tell you the truth, if you look at the U.S. economy, which is I believe a $4 trillion economy, and the Chinese economy, it's not nearly as drastic as what people assume. They just are out there with, like everything else, over emphasizing the impacts on everything. So the near term situation is, I think, revolves around a resolution on trade. If we get a resolution, especially between China and the U.S. on future trade, then all bets are off. Then we go back and we focus on the physical nature of the market, and we go, holy cow, this thing is really imbalanced in terms of our needs, our demands, and our supply. And right. I can't give you a prognostication, but I'm generally of the view that sane heads do prevail in these situations. It's important for everybody, and I think the U.S. government, and I think Mr. Trump himself, he's anxious to have a trade deal. And I think the Chinese are also anxious to have a trade deal. And it's not unusual that sometimes, people have to be poked in the eye before they'll sit up and take everything seriously. So, but it looks like there's some pretty decent green shoots on the horizon with respect to, getting to terms on a trade deal. So we shall see. It's relatively short term. We're going to know, I believe, in the next, 3 to 6 months on this, and then we'll get back to where are we really in this metal cycle, because we should be on an up leg, and this should be another one of these decade-long up legs where I think all the metals are going to make new highs.
Right. Yeah, and I think that the demand side is there regardless of the short-term politics. If you look at some of the Chinese government policies, mandates towards electric vehicles, and of course other rollouts of electric vehicles across the globe, whether it's a BMW and the European automakers getting into the business substantially to compete with maybe some of the U.S. automakers. And then also, just as you said, a lot of these big mines are coming off. You mentioned Freeport's Grasberg, which has gone from strong hands to shaky hands, more of a blended approach with government involved, which can become a problem in those types of jurisdictions.
Plus going from an open pit operation to a complex underground block caving operation,
right?
Which is going to be smaller in terms of its total throughput. In the near term, you're probably going to see production, off by 25 to 45% as they make that transition. You'll see the same at Codelco's Chuquicamata.
Right.
Those are two of the largest mines in the world.
Absolutely, and I think that there is a substantial supply issue disruption coming up. Maybe not 2019, 2020, but certainly post 2021, 22, you start to run into some serious some issues. So it'll be interesting to watch how things kind of play out across the board. So you mentioned a little while ago, you mentioned HDI. Can you just tell us kind of the group of companies there a little bit, just briefly?
Sure. HDI stands for Hunter Dickinson Inc. The two founders, Bob Hunter, Bob Dickinson. Bob Hunter's passed away. Bob Dickinson is still here. Bob Hunter was, a financial guy, and Bob Dickinson, a technical geologist. We used to affectionately call it the two Bobs. And it, for all intents and purposes, it's an incubator of the resource business. It's a private company. There's 6 of us that control the company, partners, if you will, and it simply houses what I call the intellectual capacity and the abilities to provide the knowledge and the work on these various companies. And so the way we work is not that different than what they have in the technology business, the technology side of the industry, with angel investors and incubators. We acquire assets generally at a private stage. We put them in a company. We seed that company with a bit of capital from ourselves and some of our long-term investors, and we take it along until we believe that we have a viable project for the capital markets, and then we float it either by an IPO or an RTO, and that company then relies on the services of Hunter Dickinson to obtain staff, to obtain engineering services, technical services. I mean, HDI has everything that you would find in a major mining company. I mean, we have our own capacity even to do printing. We have our own environmental scientists. Much of it are management level people, so we'll build out an exploration team and manage that exploration. And the unique thing about HDI, which a lot of people don't appreciate, is I come from a professional industry where you make money by the hour. And I left that industry because I said, that's not a way to get really wealthy. The way to get really wealthy is capital returns. You buy a stock for, a seed stock for 10 or 20 cents or 50 cents, and it turns into be $5 or $10 or $20. You can't do that by the hour. So Hunter Dickinson is not a professional services firm where we're making money by the hour. Our objective at HDI is fundamentally to break even. We provide these services to all of the companies in the group on a cost recovery basis. We want the value creation, not in HDI, because that's just by the hour. We want the value creation at the asset level in the companies. And so, historically, we've had companies like Farallon, Taseko, Detour, Pacific Sentinel Gold, Continental Gold, Continental Minerals, Great Basin Gold. A lot of different companies have come and gone, and people say, well, they stay, and our objective is, if we can take that company and that asset to a point for a takeover bid, like we did with Continental Minerals and Continental Gold and Farallon and others, then it's an exit, it's gone, and we can start up a new company and a new project.
Right.
It doesn't always turn out that way. Sometimes you have to make the decision that, okay, we can joint venture it, and then we'll bring in a partner, and with that partner, we'll develop a management team to look after that. Our people will come back and we'll go to the next project. Or if the mine needs to be built as a standalone, we'll do the same thing. And that's what happened with Detour Gold. We brought in a management team that was independent of Hunter Dickinson to be solely focused on the construction, development, and operation of that mine. And then typically those companies go independent of Hunter Dickinson. And again, our people come back to us and we start it all over again.
Right. No, that sounds great, and certainly a long-standing group, and certainly has a history and a track record of success. So I appreciate the summary on that. So Ron, we often compare difficulties of jurisdictions globally. Often where a politically unstable or unsafe jurisdiction might be a place of red flags, we often refer to the opposite end of this jurisdictional spectrum as a safe, stable, and often unreasonable jurisdiction that has a lot of red tape. So where a civil war or a greedy government might hurt a project, so can a tweet or a press release from an agency, state government, or an environmental group. Two companies who illustrate this truth quite well is Ivanhoe Mines and Northern Dynasty. So tell the audience about your resolve, your motivation, tier one assets developed regardless of headwinds of red flags and red tape.
Yeah, I agree. Geopolitical risk comes in many forms. And as you pointed out, there can be civil wars, there can be, physical elements, there can be laws and statutes, and there can be rogue elements as well. But at the end of the day, what I like to focus on is the rule of law. Is there an established respect for the rule of law, and what is the long term? Because when you're looking at assets like Robert Scott and Ivanhoe or Northern Dynasty, you're talking about assets that are going to be multi-generational, not just 10, 20 years, but probably 50 years. I mean, the Pebble Project as it stands, if it were to mine the entire project out at the proposed processing rate, would probably be, well over 100 years, maybe even 200 years. So you have to take a look at that and say, how do we ensure the long-term viability of this? What is the stability of this country historically, and are there any examples? My favorite example is Bingham Canyon. I mean, there was a project in the 1880s that was started up by Colonel Kennecott, and he started Kennecott Copper Corporation. The mineral rights were put into Kennecott Mineral Corporation, and they're still owned and operated today, 140, 150 years later by the same company. So that's the stability of ownership that we're kind of looking for. And that's what we see in the United States. We see it in North America in particular. A challenge with third world jurisdictions, I find, is that those things change too frequently. There's too much pressure on ownership. It's easier typically to get your licenses, your right to build a mine and operate, but ownership tends to be a bit capricious. And so you need to address things differently. I mean, listen, Robert's got some fabulous assets. Those two projects he's got in DRC and the project he's got in South Africa are all world-class assets, no question. He's just going to have to find partners who are capable of dealing with, the DRC government and the issues around that. And again, in the third world, you've got governments that have a great deal of pressure on them monetarily, and they need to raise taxes. So tax regimes, royalty regimes, ownership interests, all changing. And I also like to say, if government has a direct ownership, I mean, if you take Mongolia or Indonesia, how effective are they at really being a regulator in terms of health, safety, and environment? I mean, their objective is number one objective is probably profitability and cash flow, and how well can they do the business of being the regulator. So again, I go back, North America, United States in particular, is probably the best example of a regulatory regime that once you're up and operating is unbiased and you get the best results. Yes, we've had our challenges. Getting a permit in North America is the biggest challenge you face. You've got to go through some of the most strenuous and stringent environmental standards. But once you've done that, and because of the rule of law, and I've always felt this, I mean, I said, as much as we've been attacked, ultimately we can win this because the rule of law is on our side. Yes, bureaucrats can become rogue, but if you have the willpower to stay with it, those rogue elements, because they used the completely inappropriate process. I mean, when we were in our darkest days, we knew that the EPA couldn't go to court and be successful. That at the end of the day, their only salvation was to bankrupt us. And as long as we weren't bankrupt, we would win the day.
Right. No, that's a good point. Good point, and I appreciate your views on both sides, whether we're talking about a place in Africa or here in the States or even in Canada. Um, so we're going to talk about the EPA in a moment, but the bulk of the audience kind of knows about Northern Dynasty, knows the story for the most part, so we'll leave out some of the basics. But you mentioned bankruptcy. What is the company doing at this point to keep costs lean and low while it goes through this extended permitting and study period that could last for the next 3 to 4 years? So what level of cash do you have now, and what types of financing methods can we see going forward to the finish line?
So, I mean, just to revisit some of this, the kinds of deals we've done in past with majors. I mean, first of all, we started off the classic way, raising money in the capital markets. We quickly found out that this was the size and scale of a project that was going to take a lot more money than was available to junior resource companies in the capital markets.
Right.
I mean, we raised about $50 million ourselves through a couple, 3 years in the capital markets. Rio then came in with effectively about a $100 million financing in 2006. But even then, we said it's far bigger than that. We did the deal with Anglo, which was $1.5 billion of funding that they had to put in to vest at a 50% interest in the asset on what's called an all or none basis. They got to about $575 million and ran into financial issues of their own. And you know, a lot of people said, "Well, Anglo left." The reality is, Anglo didn't walk away for technical or those kinds of reasons. The asset became ours 100%, and we went back to finding a new partner. Now, there was a period there for about 3 years where we ended up litigating with the EPA, and we had to return to capital markets. We had a strong shareholder base and people who saw the asset for what it was and said, you know, let's keep this thing alive. Let's keep it moving ahead. We were able to do that. We were able to bring that litigation to a closure with a settlement agreement with the EPA in May of 2017, and then start the permitting process, you know, December 2017, January 2018. At that point, we were about to start in fall of 2017 with a process to look at a new partner, and we were approached by First Quantum about what could we do to fundamentally preempt a process, not go looking at all the other companies, but what could they do with us. And so we ended up with what was called a framework agreement, and they funded us with $37.5 million, which bought them an option to enter into a $1.5 billion deal, almost identical to the Anglo deal. And again, they had a time period during which they could do work and make a final decision on that option. We extended it twice, and that $37.5 million that they put in, we used that for the permitting money for 2018, and we continue to have money off of that. I mean, at the end of the year, we had a bonus structure that was owing to the lawyers related back to the litigation and the settlement agreement. We financed that in the capital markets with some strong shareholders, and now we are looking to repartner again. And we've had offers of financing. We haven't taken any. We're waiting for the draft EIS to come out so that we've actually got a document that says this is what the permitting process is going to look like. This is how we've evaluated the project that you've put in. And typically the draft EIS, I would say, it tells you what they're going to allow you to do. And so it's an extremely important document for the major mining companies to have in hand in talking about participating in the Pebble Project. So the number one objective is to repartner going forward. Will we from time to time have to raise money in capital markets? We might. Again, I own a big position in this company, and all dilution is very painful to me. I don't like doing it. I participate when I can, but even that has its constraints. So right now, as we're not spending a great deal of money because we've finished the initial review, and the Army Corps of Engineers and AECOM, their engineering contractor, are finalizing the draft EIS. So we're basically on hold. And the great thing about the relationship with Hunter Dickinson is when Pebble and NDM don't need services from Hunter Dickinson, they aren't paying large overheads or carrying costs of having those people around.
Right.
We've got a relatively small team in Alaska, and so the cost of carrying that is not too high. So again, I know that all the shareholders or everybody wants me to say something definitive on repartnering, when exactly will happen. It's a negotiation. I'm one side of it. If I was two sides of it, I'd be able to do that. So it's
right.
it's our objective. This isn't my first rodeo at this. I know what Pebble represents, and I know how important Pebble is to every one of the major mining companies out there. Yes, they've got anxiety over, or have had anxiety over, the issues with the EPA and the U.S. federal government, but those are behind us. And, they come in and take a look at what we're doing. Yes, the fishery is a big concern, but we are extremely confident, and every one of the mining companies that comes in looks at the same thing. This mine can be built, and that fishery not affected. In fact, that fishery, if they want it, can be enhanced, mainly financially by bringing infrastructure and lowering the costs of processing fish out there, which would benefit everybody. But even I would say environmentally by taking opportunities that exist in Western Alaska to improve environmental conditions to enhance the fishery.
Right. Yeah, and we'll get to a couple of those discussions here in a moment, because you brought up a number of points. But bless the partners' hearts. The ones that came in, the Rios and the Anglos and the First Quantums, they all contributed to a project that is still here and still viable. And so there's some thanks that goes out with their financing, and it's worked out to be quite good across the board in my view on it. And the other thing that folks seem to just forget about is the sector is cyclical. How many times have we seen big mining companies sell off assets to stay alive? We've seen, just one example that comes to mind. Goldcorp sold off Los Filos to Lee Gold. At the bottom, we've seen, there's a number of examples of companies selling off assets to survive during bear markets. So I completely understand why some people walk away.
Yeah, I was at the Mining Hall of Fame dinner last week, and one of the guys that was inducted is Jim Gill. That was Ore Resources. Ore Resources bought Quebrada from Teck Kamenko in, I think it was 2001, 2002, about the same time as we bought, or maybe it was a little later than that we bought Pebble. And I think they paid $250 million for it. And in 2007 or 2008, Teck bought it back for $4 billion. That's the kind of stuff that happens. It's a cyclical business. The big mining companies, the best, don't want to let all the cats out of the bag, but one of the best places to go shopping for great assets is in the portfolio of big mining companies. They do great work. They have a tremendous amount of projects. They can't work on all of them, and they change flavor. One day they love the project, and the next day, well, it's on the back burner. And if you can go find ones that are on the back burner that have, some geological prospectivity, you can usually cut a deal with them because they look at it as found money. And you can usually get pretty good numbers. We bought Pebble for $14 million paid over 6 years. The payment terms were $200,000 every 6 months. By the time we had to make the balloon payment in the last year of $10 million, Rio had already invested $100 million, and Anglo was putting their first money in August of 2007.
Right. Yeah, and you know, another one I can think of in the bottom, just because I know it a little bit, the uranium business at the bottom in 2000, 2001, Paladin picks up a historic asset in Namibia for
Absolutely.
15, $20,000 Australian, and turns it into a multi-billion-dollar mining operation. So this stuff happens all the time. So people got to keep it in mind and keep it in context. So
And it's a win-win for both parties because it is found money for the majors, and they aren't doing anything with it. And I think I mean, I've had discussions with majors that this you own this asset, you're not doing anything with it. It'll be good for the people that are around it, and it'll be good for the state or company that'll benefit from it. I mean, our Florence asset in Taseko is precisely that. I mean, BHP and prior owners had spent $165 million on it, and owned all of the information on it, which they provided to us because they said that's a project that should go into production. It's just not a BHP project.
Right, and the moral of the story is to have cash at the bottom, and that's that's the deal. So, no, it's very interesting, Ron. So the project, back to Pebble, it's been scaled down substantially to get off the ground. So give us some highlights of the new design, the benefits, and give us the mine parameters in terms of total capex to production, and if you can share with us the all-in sustaining costs under the smaller mine footprint, if you have some information to share.
We need to see what the Army Corps of Engineers is going to allow us to build. So the draft EIS is going to be a really important document because maybe off of the back of the draft EIS we can start to make some more definitive decisions about some elements of the project. But fundamentally, we went into permitting with a project that kind of parameters that the industry uses are daily throughput of the concentrator, and this one is 180,000 short tons, so that's like 160,000 metric tons a day. So the throughput on it is not small. I mean, it's twice the size of Gibraltar, if you will. And so Gibraltar is the second largest mine in Canada. The key to it is how we operate that project, and really the key was Tom Collier, who is the CEO of Pebble Limited Partnership, and Tom came in just at the time that the EPA ramped up its initiatives against Pebble on a preemptive veto determination, which they did later modify to just limiting production parameters. But Tom said, listen, fundamentally, the EPA has set out some guidelines that they would consider, not saying that they would permit. First of all, they can't permit it. It's the Army Corps of Engineers that does permitting. But that they would consider participating in a permitting process if the mine itself was about, I think it was 4.6 or 4.8 square miles in totality. It affected less than 10 miles of river streams and things like that. And Tom said, what we should be looking at is developing a mine that meets the kind of footprint requirements that the EPA set out. I mean, mines by their nature change over their lifetime, and Tom said, if we could build a mine that was amenable to everybody, so that we could build it and operate it and establish our credentials, or if you like the term, earn our social license, have people working, have the communities collecting taxes, and everybody's getting a benefit so that they know what's in it for me. Because right now, as a project, they only see downside and no upside. They're not feeling the upside. I mean, they say, okay, well, a job, but it's, when and how, and I'm not really getting a paycheck. Once it's in production, once it's in operation, they actually feel what's in it for me. And if at that point in time you want to extend its mine life, you want to change its parameters, that's when you could consider doing things like that. And of course, you'd have to re-permit many aspects of it. But the key is to look at it and try and build something that people are comfortable for. So we went back to the drawing boards. We said, how do we make this mine have a smaller footprint um, for the first reasonable economic life? And so we came up with this 180,000 ton a day concentrator that has a footprint of about 5.8 square miles. We put in advance water treatment plants, because that's the big issue. If you have to discharge water, because unlike cities and other areas that have atmospheric water, rainwater, snow melt fall on them, and they just discharge them into the environment, a mine has to collect all the water that comes onto the site, whether it's rain, snow melt, and has to store that water in perpetuity unless it gets a permit to discharge it. And getting a permit to discharge it is a question of what's the water quality. Well, let's take that question off the table. Let's preempt that whole process by saying we will build water treatment plants. So you just tell us what level of quality you want, and we will do that. That will allow us to discharge water, and that'll do a couple of things. First of all, we can discharge water at key times of the year to enhance water flows in streams and fish creeks. And we will eliminate the issue around excessive water storage, which that's what creates the Mount Paulies and the Samarcos of the world, is because those tailing storage facilities are meant to store sand, not water. So let's do a bunch of these things. Let's upgrade our seismic issues beyond what we think is standard engineering terms. Let's improve the embankments, both the angle of repose and reinforcing on the embankment. Let's not have waste piles sitting on wetlands. Let's process everything in the pit through the mill and put the waste in the waste tailing storage facilities, thereby reducing the footprint. Let's look at infrastructure, so road, port, and power, in a way that also minimizes its footprint on wetlands, because that's where the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers' main authority lies, on wetlands. So we came up with 3 alternate structures for. We came up with the lake ferry, which minimizes the amount of wetlands you're disturbing, and it also provides facilities for crossing the lake. So we went through all of this. The upshot of it is it's been optimized for permitting and people's comfort and level of operation. It does not, some of our gold is contained in pyrite, and typically you would need a cyanide circuit for that. And many mines have cyanide circuits. In fact, Kinross's mine, in Alaska is a 100% cyanide circuit, as would Donlin be a cyanide circuit. But Tom said, listen, let's again, people have a mental image, a mental thing about cyanide. Let's not use it. Let's just say, okay, we'll take the cyanide circuit out. We'll leave it aside. And in future, if people want us to recover more gold, because that enhances the value for taxation, it enhances the royalties for the state of Alaska, and it will enhance the returns that will come. We'll look at it then, and maybe by then,
right,
the luxiviant that you use for recovering gold out of pyrite will no longer be cyanide. It'll be something else. There's lots of work going on there now, and I can see in the next 3 to 5 years us having a completely different chemical for recovering gold out of cyanide. So these are the kinds of things that we did. And when you look at the production volumes, it's a Cobra de Panama type of development. And so people say, well, yeah, what are the actual economics? I say, well, we, even though, I've internally done some work on this, but again, we haven't selected which transportation infrastructure. We haven't selected port facilities. We haven't selected the power facilities and those kinds of things. So there's too many variables to become extremely definitive at this point. Once we get those variables locked down with the Army Corps of Engineers, yes, then we're going to go out and do these studies. But if people want to know, ballpark numbers, just Take a look at Cobre de Panama. It's a 220,000 metric ton a day operation. You know, I think the capex is $6.2 billion. Well, we're 160,000 ton a day. Our numbers aren't that different because it's the same type of operation. It's a open pit, copper gold porphyry, same kind of technology, crush, grind, float, produce concentrates, remote site. You need a road, you need power, you need a port.
Right. Economic problems. Give us a mental image of the economic problems that exist in the communities of Southwest Alaska, and what is Northern Dynasty doing to gain the hearts and minds of the community members and local leaders?
No problem. I mean, it's a wonderful region. It is, I'll say, bifurcated. You know, and I want to preface this by saying I'm not trying to usurp the opinions and authority of the local residents. They're more observations and also many long discussions with people in the region. But you've got, you know, basically two groups of communities. You have the communities on the coast that really are commercial fishing oriented predominantly, and they're kind of 110 to a couple hundred miles away from the project site. And then you've got the community's interior. Now when in the interior, they're predominantly on the lake. And so because there's no transportation, there's no roads in Western Alaska to speak of, and so the people on the lakes tend not to work in the commercial fisheries. In addition, the commercial fisheries operating at the same time as sustenance fishing is. So you get people on the lakes that are more focused on their sustenance fishing. There's not really any industry there. There are some fishing lodges that are for sport fishing or sport hunting. They're very limited. Their season is typically 2 to 3 months maximum. So job availability is almost non-existent. And again, I'm not trying to denigrate anybody. I'm just saying that, you know, the opportunity for these communities to thrive. I mean, right now they're struggling. You know, the outmigration of people from that area is pretty significant because they don't have jobs, and they want the same thing as everybody else does. I mean, when they go hunting for sustenance or when they go fishing, they use boats with motors. They use gasoline. They use rifles. They use bullets. They use snow machines. Gas costs $6 to $8 a gallon in the area. Nothing gets driven out. Everything gets flown out in transport planes. Even the commercial fishery, while power is subsidized to the residents of the coastal communities and the interior, commercial enterprises don't get subsidies. So, you know, it costs a fish processing plant 60 to 80 cents a kilowatt hour for power. You know, and I have a bit of old history in the area. Back in the 1980s, when I was, you know, a professional accountant, one of my clients was one of the biggest fish processing companies in Western North America, headquartered in Vancouver, BC Packers. And they had facilities in Western Alaska, but it was a very small processing plant. It was mainly a fish buying location, and they bought fish in Naknek and Dillingham and different villages out there, and would fly those raw fish, fresh fish, from Western Alaska to Prince Rupert to process them in a very large industrial processing plant there, because energy costs were, you know, 1-2 cents a kilowatt hour in the 1970s, 1980s. And it's still the same today. I mean, there's a treaty now that doesn't allow that, but there still is fish going back and forth, which should be processed out there. I think also if you would bring energy to the coastal communities at 8 to 10 cents a kilowatt hour, I think you could change the nature of the product. I mean, it's still fish, don't get me wrong. But instead of maybe producing most of the fish as canned fish, you could fillet it, flash freeze it, and it becomes
Right.
sushi grade. I mean, that sockeye salmon. Sockeye salmon, by the way, is the number one sushi grade fish in the world. And sockeye salmon at Skiji Market sells for $13 to $15 a pound wholesale. And
Right.
you know, there's no way they're getting that for canned fish. And so that additional margin could be felt through the entire chain of the fishermen, the fish buyers, the fish processors, and the marketing companies. And I think you open up new markets. I mean, a fish that's purchased in Bristol Bay usually commands a price that's about a third of what that same fish is in Southeast Alaska. And it's simply the infrastructure to handle the product. Now, when we go back to the interior communities and our working relationships with them, we have joint ventures with most of the villages in the area. Some villages work together, and those joint ventures and Pebble were the largest when we were in exploration. We were the largest employers in Western Alaska, which says something. An exploration project is the largest employer. There's about 7,500 people live in 50,000 square miles. So, you know, the population is very spread out. The biggest community is Dillingham with 2,500 people. Most of the villages on the lake, the biggest village is New Halen, which is about 200 people. Most of the villages are about 100, 125, and some are as small as 25. The other thing is that when your school village has less than 10 students, you lose state funding for the teachers and the other stuff. And so the kids need to go to school, so they have to go to a school in a different village, which means that the parents have to move, which means the village dies. And a lot of people are looking to try and stay in the region. Well, a project like Pebble would be an unbelievable anchor for employment. I mean, there will be more jobs at Pebble than employable people exist in Western Alaska. So I tell people, if you want a job and are prepared to train for a job, you got a job. There's about 1,800 people live in 22 villages in the Lake and Penn Borough, which is the taxing borough that we're in. And, you know, I mean, some employment stats, I think, you know, of the employable age people, roughly 35% have jobs. Most of those are, in effect, government jobs. They're jobs for the Lake and Penn Borough, they're jobs for the state, or they're jobs for the village corporation. And probably half those jobs are not full-time jobs. So there just isn't the opportunity in the region. We bring Pebble on stream. I mean, during construction, there'll be over 2,200 people, probably as many as 3,000 people working on the Pebble project on various aspects, the main mining facilities, and then the port, the power generation, and the rest. And long term, it's going to have probably something in the order of 1,200 to 1,300 employees. Well, out of an 1,800 base population, you've probably got 600 or 700 people who are employment age. I mean, we need twice as many people. And the question, and the wages will be, in today's context, the wages are $100,000 to $120,000 a year. I don't know of any jobs in Western Alaska that pay that kind of money. So they can actually support themselves, support their family. The communities could grow. I mean, I look at Williams Lake as an example, where we operate the Gibraltar mine, you know, and the Gibraltar mine has about 600, a little over 600 employees. They're making about the same, about 120,000, but in Canadian dollars, and we produce about 135 million pounds of copper. I mean, we spend, you know, 125, 145 million dollars a year in those communities. In that community, in Williams Lake, you know, it's got a population of about 25,000 people. That much money spent in that community, you know, people can live well. It's a thriving community, and we give preference to people who are prepared to live in the region and live in the communities. You know, and ultimately Pebble will have roads into the site from the north shore of the lake. So communities like New Halen and Iliamna will have road access into Pebble.
If there's any third world state in the United States, it's Alaska, and this particular region is, you can't make it up on tourism or some fishing operations. These places, the infrastructure comes, the business comes when a project of this size and scale comes in, is able to produce power, roads, infrastructure, jobs. Jobs create money, and then of course it just goes down from there. And so I think it's important, and I think you did a great job of putting together a perspective for people to understand the true situation that's occurring there, because I think so many people fail to realize what is really happening there. And another thing that you mentioned the power cost per kilowatt hour to process fish at a local facility there versus back in Canada. And I think that, and also you also made reference to the years, Ron, of when that occurred versus today. Nothing has changed, and we're talking about a span of 20, 30 years or more, and nothing has changed. And so I think people need to keep that in mind. And so lastly, with this, give us a mental image of kind of the basin that the Pebble Project is in. Kind of give us the distance from Bristol Bay. Give us the true. I've seen some pictures, and it's not full of rivers and fish and wildlife. It's very kind of a barren basin. Kind of give us a perspective on that.
Well, Western Alaska is very different than the rest of Alaska. Western Alaska really, I won't say suffered, but was affected by the ice ages. What were mountains have basically been planed off. There was 6,000 to 10,000 feet of ice that was over top of this region. So it's rolling. It's relatively flat. It is, for the most part, again, treeless. The valley that Pebble sits in is probably about 25 square miles. It's very flat. It's gentle. It's about 800 feet above sea level. Other than spring melt, there really is no running water in that valley. So there is a small lake. There are ponds in the valley, but those ponds are not. It's not because of running water. It's because when the glaciers melted, the fine ground up rock that was in the glacier formed clays, and as the glacier melted, those clays settled in little basins in the valley floor, and so because it's clay, it holds water. I mean, if you were to go punch a hole in the bottom of it, it would probably drain through the rock. But there's a bunch of these little ponds, and there's something called Frying Pan Lake, which again is very similar. It's a very shallow lake. It's you can walk across it in hip waders. There's really no fish habitat, spawning habitat. I mean, when fish come that far inland, they're looking for spawning habitat. There isn't really any spawning habitat in that valley because you can't get to the valley. The freshet ends in June, and spawning starts in late July. In fact, the outlet from the valley that Pebble sits in is to the south through Frying Pan Lake down into what's called South Fork Cockatoolie. And the first 5-6 miles of South Fork Cockatoolie after the end of the valley during spawning season are dry. So, I mean, you don't have fish coming up that high. And in terms of its proximity to the commercial fishery, it's at least 100 miles away to the nearest point of Bristol Bay. So it's a long ways away. And then on top of that, there's 8 different watersheds. We're in one watershed. That's the other thing is, Pebble East and Pebble Far East are in what's called the Talaric. The main valley is that Pebble sits in the deposit. It's in the upland part of the South Fork Cockatoolie, and the tailings storage facility is in the upland part of the North Fork Cockatoolie. And people go, oh yeah, but they're in the upper drainages. Well, that's where the least amount of water is. There's the water only. There's snow that accumulates in wintertime, And when it melts, yes, it runs and flows out. But after the melt's done by June, there's no more running water in those areas because they're so far inland. They're in the upper reaches of these. It's not like we're down, in the lower reaches down by a river or something like that. And there's 8 different watersheds. And the main watershed we're in, the Nushagak-Mulchatna, which is where the Cocktulies are, is the least productive for sockeye salmon because there's virtually no lakes, and sockeye need lakes for spawning and rearing. I mean, it's large in aerial space, but it's got no lakes in it. I mean, some of the other watersheds are the key watersheds for sockeye salmon. Not that we're going to denigrate our watershed. We're going to work to enhance it, preserve it, and make sure. Listen, if there is any chance that this fish is going to damage this fishery, harm these fish, the Army Corps of Engineers is not going to give us a permit. And you can rest assured that we, having spent over $800 million on this project, that's the very first thing that we looked at was fisheries. Because when we bought this project, having operated on the west coast of North America for most of our lives, we understand fisheries issues are preeminent. The very first thing we went in and looked at, very first thing we talked to people about, what's the most important thing to you? We asked the villagers, and they said the fish. And we said, then it has to be the most important thing for us. It's the first thing we study. And we put $150 million into environmental baseline studies, predominantly focused on fisheries issues. And we had Rio and Anglo come in. Rio invested $200 million. Anglo invested $585 million. Do you think those companies would have invested more than $5 million without answering the fish question? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They all came in and looked at it and looked at the physical, chemical nature of this and said, this mine can be built and it will not impact those fisheries. And the unfortunate part is the anti-Pebble people are not held to the same standard we are. They can just say, well, you're going to destroy the fishery and scare the hell out of everybody. And
that's correct.
I don't blame locals for having anxiety over it because they've been told, they've been scared. And they say, well, why take a chance? What's in it for me to take that chance? So that's why we've changed the size, scale, and how we're going about operating this. It's a finite mine life. It's a 20-year permit. We will not get an extension to that 20-year permit if we do anything to those fish. So, and we know that. I mean, the anti-Pebble crowd says, oh, well, these guys are just trying to do this, and their favorite term is camel's nose under the tarp of the tent. Well, listen, guys, absolutely, we're not denying that. And if we as the camel do anything wrong, then you're not going to let us in the tent. We're not going to go past 20 years. Anything we want to do would have to be re-permitted. We're doing exactly what we thought you said we should be doing. So, that's where we're at.
Yeah, and you and I both were from the Northwest. Whether it's British Columbia or northwestern United States. I'm from Oregon, and knowing that. Seen a number of hydro projects and even being involved in a number of hydro projects on some river systems in Oregon. We deal with these fish, salmon issues all the time, and whether it's fixing up a dam or putting in a fish ladder, or sometimes we even see that on some of these river systems that there's a natural barrier, there's a waterfall, and guess what, guys? The salmon can't jump 200 feet and get up into the next stream. And further to that too, as you know, in the mountains, these rivers and streams get very, very small. They all contribute to one larger river that flows downhill. And at the very, very heights of these areas, there is very, very little issues that need to be dealt with at these levels. And so I think that a lot of folks, see this stuff coming from a city. They've never been in the mountains or even seen remote states like Alaska in their lives, but they have this opinion.
Yeah. One of my favorite lines is one of the guys from First Quantum. He likes to point to these large office towers and say, that's just a mine upside down, if you want to know what the impacts look like.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, that's great.
To all the urban dwelling friends, yes. I mean, 90% of what's above the ground used to be below the ground.
Right. So the mainstream media seems to hold many misunderstandings about Pebble. The mainstream media and many environmental groups still don't seem to understand much about Pebble, the actual location relative to sensitive waterways, wildlife habitat, ecosystems, or even the high-level engineering and science behind the project design. Yet folks seem to take an uneducated negative position against the project, perhaps because they are too lazy or unwilling to take the time to understand the complex nature of a mining project. So people are consumers. They buy iPhones, they buy electric cars, they order salmon fillets, they buy cosmetics, they use computers, they enjoy modern infrastructure like good roads, power grids, internet, clean water. They enjoy these things while knowing full well that the risks that come when you get in the car or hop in an airplane to travel. They know the risk of not having these conveniences at their hands. There is a level of trust that you have when you let a pilot of an aircraft transport you from point A to point B. People trust that there will be a salmon fillet at the grocery store tomorrow. People trust that they will get good care when they need a hospital. So the building blocks of this basic relationship and modern advancements we all enjoy literally every day are the result of harvesting natural resources, whether it's strawberries or uranium. So if you don't agree, then you shouldn't buy a ULED TV. You shouldn't use a smartphone. You shouldn't drive an electric car or even have a car at all. You shouldn't even use the power grid. So wind, solar, coal, nuclear, hydro, you name it, everything requires the use of natural resources to sustain modern life. So Ron, to get to the point, what are the common misconceptions of Pebble that people need to be corrected in their thinking? And tell us what Northern Dynasty is doing, leading the way to a responsible and sustainable mine design that mitigates risk.
So you're right. There is I call it a disconnect. There's a huge disconnect between the majority of the population and their understanding of where everything comes from. One of my favorite lines is, "Do you know where electricity comes from, or do you simply think it comes from a hole in the wall?" It's unfortunate that in this modern world, we just, by far and away, too many people are not interested in understanding where things come from. I mean, I get this out of a lot of people, veganism and vegetarianism. At least those people understand something about the source. The majority of people, they go eat those fillets and they go eat the salmon and all the rest, and they don't want to know about it. They don't want to know about where lithium comes from for Tesla batteries, or where even glass comes from. So on Pebble, we have a huge outreach program in Alaska that I think has become very successful, and that was well demonstrated during this last election, the midterm election, when we got out there on the street talking to small groups, one-on-one, face-to-face with people. I mean, there's too much advertising today, and people discount advertising. And on top of that, it's well established that in print media and electronic media, negative news sells at a ratio of 10 times what positive news. People seem to be attracted to negative news. They're not attracted to positive news. So if you're running a website and you're running only positive news, you're not going to generate much revenue off of advertising. So you flip to negative. And you look at at our news media. It's how often do you get a positive story? It's negative. And so when we were doing polling in Alaska about people's views on Pebble, the one thing came loud and clear: people were sick and tired about hearing about Pebble in the newspaper, on radio, and on TV. And so Tom devised this process where he hired a team and made sure that team was well informed and sent them out into the communities. We meet with groups of school teachers, community business groups. We'll do one-on-ones with people, and it really has made a substantial difference. And so what this does, and also outreach in the Native communities. A lot of people believe that if a Native community is against you, that there's some scientific basis for that, and so they grasp onto that. So when the Bristol Bay Native community is anti-Pebble, people say, oh, well, that's good enough for me. If they listen to the communities around the lakes and the APCs, the New Halens, the Iliamna villages, because we've done a lot of outreach in those communities, they are turning their opinions around, and people are starting to listen to that. We do a lot of community communications. I think that's been probably our biggest key. Then the next level was to produce a pamphlet that said, basically, here's what you've heard about Pebble, and here's the reality about that particular point. And we've tried to make it concise, less than 10 pages long. It was a big mailer. I think we sent out about 200,000 of them in Alaska. And we're getting responses back from people that say, I used to be anti-Pebble, but I've come to understand the facts about this over the last 6 months, and I believe Pebble is something that the state of Alaska must evaluate and determine how we best develop this. We've never said, give us a permit. We've never said that. We need to earn that permit. The only way we earn that permit is by putting ourselves through, or the Army Corps of Engineers putting us through the most rigorous permitting process in the world today, and that's the 404 process. I don't understand how an announcer on a major television broadcast can get up and say that Pebble should be stopped and shouldn't go through the 404 process. The NRDC, Natural Resource Defense Council, on their own website, they say that the 404 legislation is the Magna Carta of environmental assessment worldwide. How do they adopt a position that denies Pebble the right to go through that process? It's simply hypocritical. And I think that the CNNs of the world who adopt that kind of a position are saying, we can't sell a positive story on Pebble. We can't sell that it's going to go through permitting the most rigorous. We can't tell the world that the United States of America has the most rigorous permitting system in the world. We have to tell them something negative, because that's how we'll get them to watch us. But we're being dedicated, a diligent effort. It's not without expense. We've got to go through this, and we are committed to that process. I mean, you know us. I've been at this a long time. I know that if I can get to somebody face to face and I can sit down and talk to them like this, I can convince them that I'm not asking you, give me a permit. I'm simply saying, let us go before the most rigorous permitting process in the world, up against the world's best engineers in the world, the Army Corps of Engineers and the contractors they hire, to demonstrate and prove to them that we can protect the environment, that we can protect the fish, that we will not damage that fishery, and that we will develop this mine in the most responsible possible way, and we will share those benefits. It will have, no question, it's going to have a footprint. It's going to have an impact. You can't dig a hole in the ground and not have that. But its benefits far outweigh that aspect of it. And at the end of the day, we won't leave a mess. We'll clean it up.
Right. And I don't think people look at even one thread of evidence, but form an opinion just because it was on prime time.
Yes.
So, yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it's certainly interesting, the debacle that we have with some of the the mainstream and some of the public out there. The good thing is, luckily, we still have agencies and we still have regulatory groups, whether it's the EPA or a FERC or a U.S. Army Corps that look at this stuff and have an objective opinion. So that's
that's all we're asking, and that's right. What every regulator should be. I mean, when the EPA launched their preemptive initiative, that was a demonstration that they were biased. They were no longer an unbiased regulator, and that's the worst thing. That now you become a third world country. If your bureaucracy, your government becomes proactive, you become a DRC. You become a Mongolia. Right. You become an Indonesia.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. From red tape to red flags yet again.
Yep.
So, yep. Ron, this is going to wrap up part one. I appreciate you coming on and chatting with us, and we'll get started with part two soon.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to explore Pebble with your audience, and I look forward to concluding that in part two of the discussion.